this is a beginner course, so it kind of makes you feel like, whoa, I'm doing it. I'm doing this on my own. I'm discovering the patterns little by little, and I'm just hacking the language through and just building.
They asked us to write little like sermons in Spanish that we have to then like deliver. Like, it was good. Within 6 weeks, I was like creating a lot of language on my own. So ciao amici, welcome to LingoCast. I'm here with Felipe.
Hey,
I'm Sophie. And today we're going to talk about some strategies for language learning.
yes, as you notice, we're in a new place, so we're trying this out, and let's see if it works out in the future.
Yeah,
So
it's exciting.
it's exciting. So today's topic is strategies for learning languages, methods, resources. What we used, what I use, and it's kind of like those questions like, well, you guys are the language experts, but what do you guys use, right? This you guys talk about a lot of stuff, but what do you guys actually use to learn your languages?
Yeah.
So that's what today's all about. So we're gonna start with Sophie. So Sophie, how did you come about learning your languages? You mentioned that you went into an immersion program at school. I believe that a lot of that these programs would definitely not be available in some places outside the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine Brazil, you need to have a lot of money to be in a program like that and live in a capital city. Yes, and now tell me your experience with Spanish and Norwegian, the two languages that you learned.
Yeah. So I think for French and Norwegian, generally it's been a pretty standard like classroom experience, you know. With French, I have more recently been able to have more kind of experiential learning, like being actually immersed like in France or different things, but mostly classroom learning. With Spanish, it's kind of been a combination of those. I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where I was asked to learn Spanish, and so I went to a training center where you learn how to be a missionary and you also learn Spanish, whatever language it is.
Okay, the mission training center.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. How is it like? What they do? And give me the rundown step by step. What happens in there? Because there's probably a lot of mystery that surrounds the
That's true.
missionary training center.
So, honestly, in some ways, it's similar to an immersion program where I went to the training center in Mexico, and so
You didn't go to the one in Utah?
Right.
You went to the one in Mexico?
Mexico City.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Which is cool because then you have teachers there who are Mexican and try to use as much Spanish as they can in the classroom. You are surrounded by a lot of other English speaking, a lot of Americans, but there's a mix of, among the missionaries, there's kind of a mix, a linguistic diversity, but the teachers and other like employees at the center are all Mexican. And so we don't really interact a ton with people outside of the training center, but you're getting a lot of input from just the people there around you, which is good. And we did kind of language classes, so kind of a similar classroom experience. A lot of it is focused on, when it comes to like vocabulary, it's kind of focused on what you're going to need to use as a missionary, which is different than like a high school classroom, for example.
Yes.
But still like grammar lessons and different things. And we had kind of like a textbook thing, again, geared towards missionary language in Spanish, but still helped me get kind of a basic foundation in Spanish. Some of it is that they ask you to memorize things, but it's not like they're sidestepping language learning just to get you to memorize things. They want you to legitimately develop the skills to create on your own in the language. For me, having already learned French, a lot of it was kind of simple, you know, but there was also a lot of kind of interference, like trying to say things with a French accent and use French grammar that was kind of different in some places. But it's a great experience. A lot of your time, I was there for 6 weeks, and a lot of that time is dedicated to just studying Spanish, using Spanish. They asked us to write little like sermons in Spanish that we have to then like deliver. Like it was good. Within 6 weeks I was like creating a lot of language on my own. So and then I went into the mission field, right? I was in my area of service. I was in Oregon.
So you went from, were you in Utah or Virginia?
I was in Virginia.
So you went to Virginia, from Virginia to Mexico,
Yes.
and from Mexico to Oregon.
To Oregon, that's right.
What the? Okay.
Where there were tons of Spanish speakers. And there are tons of Spanish speakers.
I would not expect them. Okay.
I know. So it was great. I got to use Spanish like every day of my mission. And it was interesting because it wasn't quite an immersion experience being in Oregon. But I was still able to use a lot, and I was able to interact with native speakers super often to like refine my Spanish. And I think I mentioned on another episode that I went back and like watched a video I had made partway through my mission. And I was like, I thought I was way better than I was. Like my accent especially is like not there. I got conceptually, like I got the grammar and different things pretty easily. But like, and still at this point I don't feel like super confident, but so it takes a while, from there. But it was great to get like the interaction with native speakers a lot of the time and to continue to learn that way, in addition to like studying for my textbook and stuff.
So there are multiple missionary training centers around the world. The main one being in Utah, and that's the one I went to.
Yeah.
So there I think the program is this more or less the same for all of them. I wrote a huge journal that I wrote a huge journal about language learning, and I'm using some of my insights here today in this podcast.
Nice.
So I remember the classes were 8 hours. The classes were 8 hours, with breaks, lunch pauses, and sometimes exercise pauses. There was an exercise pause, lunch pause, and meal pause. So like and from what I remember, you get like increment of 3 hours more or less, 2 hours something. So and that sums all to 8 hours in the classroom
And some of
learning
that
language.
is language, like grammar kind of learning, and some is in the language but kind of missionary techniques.
A lot of it is, so it's kind of like a linguistic boot camp if you think about it, because you set yourself to, you're basically being pushed to the limit of immersionness. I think that's a word.
That's great.
But yeah, the people, a lot of people struggled with the place. Me just being surrounded by people and never being alone, the privacy was a big thing to me in the MTC. But the language was never an issue to me. I had a very easy time with German, and your teacher, the guy always speaks to you in German, always,
Yeah.
like no exception, always in German.
Right.
And you need to, and little by little, you start getting start getting patterns. You start getting how things work, which now I'll share a little bit about my experience with learning my first foreign language that I learned on my own, which was French. I remember that I saw an ad. I might even link this ad. That it was an ad on YouTube that talked about learning language in 10 days.
Wow.
Have I mentioned that before?
I don't think so.
So it was an ad that talked about learning a language in 10 days. And I'm like, this seems interesting. Well, I wonder what that is. And then I kept watching. Those ads that it takes you to a page, but you can't skip the video. There's no progress bar, so you'd have to watch the whole thing. And it's like, how this is the marketing technique that they just keep talking and talking and not telling you what's going on. They're like, yeah, but before I share, he's like, I know what you're doing. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So basically, it's the Pimsleur method. I didn't use that one, but I remember. But the Pimsleur method made me curious to research more methods, and that's when I eventually found the Michel Thomas method. Right, that one, it was the goal. I would say the goal of the basically the course that set me to my path
Mm.
in language learning.
Wow.
I was in Brazil, and then I remember that I was able to acquire the Michel Thomas method using my methods, and and I remembered that I just started listening to it. I would go to school, and sometimes I would run away from class, climb up a mango tree, just sit there and listen. Yes, that I would do that exactly, and this was back in 2014, exactly 10 years ago.
Wow.
It was around, I think it was around this time. Right now it's September. It was around this time, 2014. So it's been almost 10 years since I started learning French.
Crazy.
10 years of my language learning,
Exciting.
and I remember that I had an iPod Touch. Those very old ones that they
Classic.
don't make anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the screen was like the pixels were half dead. Sometimes like that, and the pixels were half dead. Sometimes the thing was old. It was the thing was bad. The iPod was the thing was from 2011, and since my dad didn't want to use it anymore, so he just gave it to me. So I would use that for language learning. So I would just climb up a mango tree, and I would just sit up there, like just lie lie on a branch and just listen to it, or like just sitting on a branch, like it repeat everything. So basically, the way it works is Michel Thomas just breaks down language, and will use the morphemes, the patterns of the first language, which is English, and then it'll help you build French, right?
Okay.
Like kind of like he's gonna tell you, all right, most most words that end with ty in English, like t, or will end with T. And then you have to and then you ask you, how would you say then liberty? And you're like, oh, liberté. And then you'll be like, oh, how would you say formality? Like formalité. And then you would build sentences like that. And then it's like, okay, to say it is, it's c'est. The is la for female. Let's stay with that. Let's keep that for now. Female, la. It's like everything that's in piece by piece, chunk by chunk, and then you start forming. Like, how to say it's the formality? It's like, oh, c'est la formalité. I was like, what's the? It's I was like, what's the possible? How to say it's the possibility. It would be like, oh, c'est la possibilité. Or like, yes, there we go. And then this is a beginner course, so it kind of makes you feel like, whoa, I'm doing it. I'm doing this on my own. I'm discovering the patterns little by little, and I'm just hacking the language through and just building. So that made me feel very good, and I want to, and that and that's what made me fall in love with that. The problem that a lot of people have is basically the Michel Thomas is he was traumatized with the war. He never really let people learn his method or dissect it or even study with him. Some people studied it, but it was very in a session with Michel Thomas cost like $10,000 back, $10,000 back in the day, just so you to like get this. And to be fair, it's not that hard to build, but it's more of an art more than a science, because you really need to have the charisma, the way of explaining. Like you need to explain the concepts so the student, the learner, can get it, and then
Interesting.
and then
But it is systematic in how he builds it up.
it's systematic. A lot of it, there's a lot of storytelling. Sometimes it goes into, he rambles about linguistics, and he rambles about like historical, how like he gave an example how um in French there's no concept of ing, right? Doing, going. I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? He's like, qu'est-ce que tu fais? Oh, tu fais quoi? What do you do?
Right.
What do you do? The closest thing to ing would be the en train de faire, en train de, which means like in the process of. But even then, it would be weird for you to say that.
Yeah.
Or like, and that's one of the things is that you're not translating things literally. There's like it was like, okay, I am is je suis. How to say here? I was like, oh, je suis ici. Like, well, that's correct, but it's not. It doesn't mean what you're trying to say. normally say I'm here, man, but like I'm present in the moment, you were gonna say we would say in French, je suis là. And then he would tell you that. It's like, okay, keep that in mind as a concept.
Interesting.
Like that's not transferable from English to French.
Right. That's a good principle.
And so things like that is kind of like you need to explain very well when you're dealing with a method like Michel Thomas. But I really like it. And there's another guy that's that I really like too. His name's Michaelis. It's the Greek names are very weird. Those linguistic patterns, they do not go in my brain very well. Afteoru, I just the guy from Language Transfer, the Greek guy from Language Transfer. He basically it's very similar to Michel Thomas, but instead of he tells you to think, right? Think through, think things through, think the sentence through, and then you realize like, okay, now I get it, and I tried this with my wife, and she got and her French is all she did was listen to that.
Wow.
Yeah, we probably talked to her, but like
She's very good.
all her French just came from that.
Wow.
But then again, of course, right? She had a big advantage coming from Spanish.
Right.
The fact that she could transfer a lot of Spanish over to French,
Yeah.
was very helpful to her.
Yeah.
So an English speaker would not have the same advantage. So that was something that I always say, that language learning is not equal for everybody. The Michel Thomas does very badly for languages that are very far away, like Chinese,
Sure.
like Mandarin Chinese. I listened to the Chinese course too. I'm like, this is good, but okay. I get it, but it's not. You don't get the same feeling as the Spanish ones or the German one. Like you kind of feel like you're very limited. But of course,
Yeah.
Mandarin is a it's an Asian language. What is it called? A Sino. What's the name of the family? The name of the family?
I don't know.
Sino-Asiatic. I don't know. I forgot the name of it.
Sino is the Chinese.
I know Sino means Chinese, but like, what's the name? The word Afro-Asiatic is in my head. I was like, no, that's not it. Sino-Asiatic. What is that called?
I don't know. We'll look it up.
I gotta put it on the screen later when I find out. So yeah, it belongs to that branch, very far away from any Indo-European language. So I'm like, well,
It doesn't work as well.
it doesn't work as well, of course, but it doesn't mean it's worthless.
Sure.
So of course, it doesn't mean it's worthless. The principles, they're very advantageous if you want to learn a language that's closer, like French, German, most European languages. You can do that. So the second,
So both those, can I ask? Both those were things that you would just listen to and kind of repeat or like try to come up with an answer prompted, but it was a listening and speaking kind
he was listening and speaking, yeah, because he would ask, he would ask, and then and then you would answer, but you needed to think it through.
Right.
So the worst mistake that I see a lot of people doing when going through the Michel Thomas course is that they just repeat, right? They just listen to the person and then like repeat after the person.
But they don't try to come up with it.
But they do but they don't try to actually listen to instruction and thinking on their own.
Right.
So that's one thing that I noticed with so that was my first experience with that's my first resource. So do you have any Norwegian, do you have any
Well, something I'm thinking about, I kind of asked, like, 'cause I'm thinking about in my Norwegian classes, our professor has really emphasized, like, the 4 abilities of speaking, listening, reading, writing.
Okay, I have a question. This is probably in a very how does one go about learning a language that's not very doesn't have a lot of resources like Norwegian? That's something that I'm imagining right now, because Norwegian is kind of like a French language in a way.
Yeah.
So you said in a classroom says you was in a classroom setting. Was it the same thing as the MTC? Was it different? How was it?
Yeah, it's a little different because it's just a college course.
Mm-hmm. How's that like?
We do have a lot of resources. Our professor, like, tries to provide a lot of resources for us to use, but it's true that it feels a little more limited than something like French or Spanish or German. Even with a, like, bilingual dictionary, like difficult to find an English to Norwegian dictionary, which is kind of strange,
Really?
in my opinion. Yeah.
I thought, okay.
Yeah. Or at least a good one, I guess. But and so and it's kind of hard, like in my first semester, like Norwegian 101, using just a monolingual dictionary, just like Norwegian words defined in Norwegian. I'm like, I don't have any kind of basis to understand this. And our professor really wanted, as soon as we can like start using those kind of monolingual resources, like try to use them. But when you have very little knowledge, it can be hard to like I use Google Translate a lot because I need some kind of foundation. If I had a bilingual dictionary, I would use that too. But yes, it's true that there's fewer resources in that sense. There's still a ton of like media that we can consume. That's been part of my classes every time I've taken a class. We do weekly media journals where you're supposed to read something, listen to something, watch something, um, in order to get some input, some uh what's that called? Authentic?
Authentic input.
Yeah.
Natural input, I think.
It's
Not
made by Norwegian
for Norwegians.
It is
Yes. Authentic, yes. Not for learners, huh?
Yeah, so that's a big part of language learning and something that my professor has really stressed for us. Um, and so but then we have assignments, we have our textbook, we do exercises, we do grammar and vocab, we are also supposed to do weekly speaking where we get with a classmate and ideally someone who's at your level. I think that's another important thing is that it can be useful. There's a student here at BYU that I know that is from Norway, and speaking with him is really helpful because he's a native speaker. But as a very beginner, it can also be helpful to just be speaking with someone else who's close to your level, and you're both kind of able to say the same sorts of things.
But that's not a one-on-one class. But are you able to speak on the go after a one-on-one class or no?
Yeah, I mean, outside of class, we were supposed to discuss, like, okay, this week we talked about like university life. Now, like, get with a classmate and try to talk about some of those things, but not in like a memorized way or in a like fill in the blank, but just like asking a question and like responding. And so creating language again pretty early on. And so,
So you say speak from day one then.
yeah, I mean, our professor did start day one of our 101 level speaking Norwegian. And I had this little panic in me, like, what is going on? But she did a good job of trying to explain with like visual aids and different things. And then she switched into English for some of it. But, that was a big thing in the MTC was like, as you mentioned, like instructors only speaking to you in the foreign language. And like the big mantra was speak your language.
SYL. Yes,
IL.
I remember that one. SYL, speak your language.
HSI.
I have I have a problem with that. It's basically I remember writing about that. Is that people sometimes they would 95% of the time you're gonna spend with people at your level. And the problem with the SYL I have is that you're gonna get their habits. Their bad habits, you're gonna get their accent. And I remember that a friend of mine that was learning German, he was in Germany during COVID, and basically all of his roommates were American.
Right.
And the thing with him is that he learned to speak German with an American accent.
Right.
I'm like, what are you doing? I was like, why? It's like, why is your German a mix of a Brazilian accent along with an American accent or American intonation? What are you trying to do? It's like, no, I just learned like that. I was like, well, because he would be speaking, he wanted to improve German, but he couldn't go outside.
Right. And
Everything.
speaking with
And he was speaking German with Americans, so he's got German. He learned German with American accent. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, that is weird.
So that's kind of one of the things the problems I have with speaking with someone at your level.
That's a fair point. And I think it's a big thing to remember is the combination of all these things. Like I mentioned, the different skills of like listening, reading, writing, speaking, but a combination of different input and output methods, right? So that you are speaking with your classmates, but you're also in class speaking with your professor or listening to native speakers, or you do have opportunities to speak with a native speaker, but you're getting a variety. And I think each is beneficial. But to your point, it can't just be I'm just speaking with someone else who knows just as much Norwegian as me, and I'm gonna, like, improve, you know, you
Yeah.
can have that.
Yeah, but the question is, does it do more damage than good? I think that's something we can talk about later.
Yeah, we could talk.
Yeah. But now another resource that I used was Asimil, one of the most famous resources in Europe. And if you and by the way, the older books, they're free on Internet Archive, and they're like from the 80s and 90s, so they're chill to download. And as far as I know, I don't think the language has changed much from the 90s till now. So the and
Even, like, grammars
even
and things.
I mean, probably the orthography a little bit in the style maybe, but overall the language hasn't changed that much.
So what languages did you learn through
So,
Python?
Russian.
Okay.
I used Michel Thomas and then Asimil. German, I didn't use Michel Thomas in German, but I did use Asimil for German in the beginning, especially for the beginning of learning German. I had a lot of Asimil. It's the thing about Asimil is not much the book itself, but how to use it,
Okay.
because it's gonna give you the way it works. It has a bilingual text.
Okay.
It's gonna have a grammar explanation. It's gonna have an audio in the target language,
Okay.
but not in the first language. So it's gonna be a dialogue or story or something from there. Sometimes they're kind of funny, but they kind of have like that dry humor sometimes. And like this totally dry humor, but like yeah it yeah this the humor is actually, they have some of them are boring, some of them are cool, but hey, it's language. But they use a lot of native expressions that native speakers use, so that's nice. And I remember that I remember we were going through Asimil for German and for Russian, yeah. And it was actually I also did Asimil for Mandarin Chinese.
Whoa.
Yeah, I forgot to mention I tried to learn Chinese.
English to Mandarin?
English, they're all okay. So since Asimil is a French-based company, I did from the first book was English Russian, but the second book there was no English Russian, but it was French Russian.
Oh, wow.
So I did French Russian,
Wow.
and it was French German.
Okay.
It was French German that I remember, and it was also French Chinese.
Oh.
So I learned Mandarin Chinese for French. It's crazy, huh? So I remember with Asimil it was hard. The way I did it was I just listened to it, and then I wrote down the words I didn't know from the text. It helped you a lot with understanding, to be fair.
Mhm.
And then I wrote down from the text in in the actual alphabet, except the Chinese. I didn't use the characters. I did the pinyin, and then I would just try to repeat it and then do the exercises. The thing is that the more advanced you went, the longer lessons took. So one lesson in the beginning stages, one lesson would be like 10 to 15 minutes, right, for you to go through and do the whole thing. This by lesson 80, it would take 30 minutes to 50, 30
Okay.
minutes to 1 hour. That's how long it would take me to go through, do the exercises. And everything.
Interesting.
So that was very long. And sometimes I would lose patience. I would just get distracted in between and things like that. And that was for Russian. And I also remember that the Assamese has a thing called deuxième vague, the second wave, which is basically like the first wave is passive and the second wave is active. So right, you're gonna have a half of the book, so 50 lessons. You're gonna have you're gonna go passively. I might It's something like that, but in the book it tells you it tells you more exactly how it is. But then it tells you to go back and do everything actively.
Okay.
I go over the lessons again and do everything actively.
What does that mean?
Basically, like try to actually make sentences. Try to actually do this, or sometimes they'll have a grammar explanation. They'll reference a previous lesson. You have to go there and remember, right? So
Interesting.
that's the way Asimil does. It's very good, they're still producing books to this day. But I like the older ones better because they apparently have more content and less pictures. The newer ones seem to have more pictures and less content. And for Arabic, I used for Arabic was the hardest language to to come up with materials.
Uh-huh.
So I found there was this book from 1997 that I got called Syrian Colloquial, which is I think was published in Australia even.
Okay.
And that was one book I used. I went through the whole thing. It was
Kind of a workbook.
it's just a typical workbook. Like when you're working with a minority, I don't know, I wouldn't call it Arabic minority language, but like Syrian Arabic specifically, where resources are scarce, right?
From English.
From English to obviously from
Yeah.
English, even French, because I look for French too.
Yeah.
And from French to Arabic, a language is not standardized even. So that was challenging. There was also a free project called Culture Talk, 5 language colleges, and then and then it's so cool because it's similar to Asimil. It's basically interviews, but they're transcribed in English and in Arabic. So I remember I would write down the whole thing. The way I did it was I trained the Arabic script by writing, copying the whole script, by the whole thing, the whole interview, and then I would mark down all the words I didn't know and then make sentences with them
Wow, cool.
on the following page, right? I can show you later. It's very cool. And I did that for Arabic, for Syrian Arabic specifically. I got a ton of vocabulary, like was it's very nice, but the problem with Syrian Arabic is very varied. So I kind of had a mix. So my Arabic is a little bit of a mix of Syrian with Palestinian, with Jordanian, and with Lebanese. So I get a lot of these mixed up. So yeah, that was for Syrian Arabic. Another very underrated resource is actually the DLI resources.
Oh, I remember talking to you about.
So there are
Tell
two
us.
DLI resources. There are two DLI resources. The newer ones, which is
Maybe tell us what DLI is for.
okay. DLI means Defense League Institute.
Language?
No, Defense League Institute.
Oh, okay.
It's basically the U.S. Army.
Okay.
So the U.S. Army actually printed these courses for personnel in the 60s. I'll talk about the newer ones and the old ones. I can start with the older ones.
Okay.
In the 60s and 70s, it was kind of like the golden age of linguistics.
Uh-huh.
The golden age of linguistics where they did studies and about syntax and everything. They got all these books in all languages and just published them and they used to train soldiers and diplomats with those materials.
Mm.
And they have an audio too. And they were drills where the sound quality is kind of, yeah. So they potato quality. If someone is willing to remaster them, you deserve a blessing, deserve a kiss. And then I remember, but the thing is very methodic, very drill based. Like they repeat these, repeat.
Okay.
So they bore you, but you get tired after a lesson.
Yeah.
But they're very good because for minority language, for a language that's rare and scarce like Syrian Arabic, it's the best you got.
Okay.
Right. So that was it. So that book, the DLI courses, the 5 language college scripts and things, and now for the newer DLI courses, basically the newer the DLI is actually a similar concept to if you go to Gloss, if you type Google or in my Gloss DLI, it'll take you to a platform of the U.S. Army website. No, you're not gonna get tracked in anything. The thing is that it's one of the best resources for learning languages, and it's absolutely free.
Cool.
Which is basically there's a bilingual text, and I of course I recommend for that's a thing that they lie about. It's like, oh, it's for beginner, but we look at it as like you need to be at least you're like beginner, intermediate, going to intermediate to actually understand that. So they will like it. Say like, this is totally for beginners. Like, no, it's not. You're lying. But yeah, it's very nice, but it's actually, it takes a lot of work because they'll be and that's the coolest thing. It'll be authentic material. So right, it will be interviews, videos, and then when you download it, you're gonna have and by the way, this is all legal, by the way. There's nothing sketchy about this. Um you're gonna have like a page where you can actually do quizzes on what you listened. Right now it's like, okay, they'll ask you a question. Oh, what do you learn about from this? And you're like, oh, I for this, what's the topic about? Especially like if you want to get into very specific terminology, they're gonna have an article about. They had an article about the dilemma in Arabic. It was one of the advanced Arabic ones about the dilemma of cloning, right?
Whoa.
Of the science of cloning,
Mm.
and he had ton of vocabulary. And like, I have no idea what this means in Arabic.
Right.
So I remember learning the word about injection. We're learning about the word about cloning, about ethical matters, of things like that.
Interesting.
So you're gonna have a lot of different themes. So that's the cool thing about this BLI,
Cool. Yeah.
the DLI courses. If basically scarce resource right there. It's gold.
Yeah.
So that's so how far are you into Norwegian in your opinion?
Oh gosh. It's been slow lately.
Slow. How come?
I don't go to class. I'm auditing. 201 is the level that's supposed to be intermediate, you know.
You're already 2-1?
Yeah.
Would-
But I'm just busy, so I haven't been
Would you say that to the 200 levels, the 200 level classes, are they equal for in uniform for all languages?
at BYU.
Or I think BYU or any university.
Typically. I mean,
Typically.
I feel like what you said earlier applies, that language learning isn't equal.
Uh-huh.
You know, I can't imagine that an English speaker in a Mandarin 201 class is having a similar or like quite the same experience as me in a Norwegian 201 class. You know, I just have to imagine that's pretty different. But I'm sure they try to make them kind of, generally you're learning like I bet they'll use like the actual scale or similar scales where my professor will talk about that. She's like, you guys are approximately at this point in the scale. I think a lot of us at this point are like intermediate low.
Intermediate low?
I think so, because we're able to like create more with the language and stuff. But obviously you're trying to, in 201, 200 levels, probably you're climbing in intermediate range, but I don't really know for sure.
For my Russian, I can talk about the classroom setting. Because for Russian, I did take the 201 class. And actually, no, I went to the 202 class.
Okay.
And now I'm taking the 302 class.
Nice.
And the professor is a sweetheart. And she just lets me, I feel like she lets me get away with mistakes. And I really don't like that. I really like, there are mistakes in Russian. Like, I know I'm doing a mistake. Why are you not correcting this?
Okay, maybe we could do another lesson on like pedagogy. I mean, I'd have to read up on that. But I think it's really interesting. For example, I guess sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. But
We'll come back to that.
okay, but the thing is that like people will be different, right? I like when people correct me.
Yeah.
So sometimes
That's how you.
because sometimes like because I'm an experienced language learner. I learned a ton of languages, so I do know how the process works, right? I don't get discouraged if I'm corrected on a spot.
Yeah.
Someone might feel like, oh, get self-conscious. Like, of course, I understand that.
Yeah.
But for me specifically, I like when things are harsher.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, what are you gonna say again? The pedagogy?
Yeah, we could come back to this another time, but it makes me think about just kind of things like correction in the classroom or in other settings where you have kind of a teacher figure. How to go about that in the right way to like support language learning and stuff. But maybe we can come back to that in another episode.
Yes. And the last thing before we go is something I really, really like, which is graded readers.
Okay.
Graded readers are basically stories for intermediate language learners. They're basically stories with everyday vocabulary, and I haven't seen a lot of them in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of languages that I've seen most of them in European languages. They're gonna have the level. So you can have A1, A2. They follow the cipher, the European one.
Mm-hmm.
A1, A2, B. I was gonna say A3. Like, wait, what? There's no A3. A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. But basically, actually, I don't think there's anything over B2 for graded readers. Because if you're at a B2, then you can read basically any book.
Sure.
So that's what they think. Um, so I remember reading a lot of um graded readers for German after I returned from my mission. I went in and read a ton of graded readers, and that helped me a lot with my German vocabulary. Um, and the crazy thing is that I read things for A1 and A2.
Wow.
And even then, those helped me a lot because there were expressions and vocabulary words I had not previously learned.
Yeah.
Right, because I was confined to like a very small context in the German language. So I was able to expand my German that way reading. And reading helps you a lot, right? It helps you.
Totally.
Yeah, for sometimes I can formulate a sentence like, I don't know if that sounded right. It's like, yeah, it's totally right because I read it. Because
something like that.
I read something like that. I know how this sounds like. This sounds natural to me. From sometimes it gets you to an unconscious level to the point that you're like, okay, this feels right.
Yeah.
So it's
with vocab.
It's vocab too.
Learning vocab, yeah, it's super helpful.
But of course, there'll always be interferences from other languages too. To this day, I really struggle to read Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
Different characters, I read slower. I focus less, and basically, it's another language. Even though they say it's not, I feel it's another language. It looks like another language.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like another language.
Yeah.
It basically is. It's not diglossia. Basically, if I read the formal Arabic, I'm like, I'm having a hard time understanding this. So for Arabic, I resorted to children's books.
Yeah.
So they will, with a lot of repetitive words, a lot of repetitive
Mm-hmm. Like structures.
structures, so you can get it. So you understand a lot of great, and yeah, Internet Archive, you can find a ton of graded readers, especially the older ones. Oh, don't be afraid of old stuff. Old is sometimes gold. I've used older materials, and they're amazing. From the DLI to the older Asimil. But yeah, and that's my experience with language learning till now.
Lovely.
Lovely.
Great.
So do you have anything else to add in?
I think the last thing I would add as I think about my experiences is like the cultural element, like along with like
Big one.
kind of core linguistic things.
Yes.
Having a cultural element to your language learning helps so much because I think, I mean, for example, for Norwegian for me, it was sort of a random decision on my part to take Norwegian classes, but I immediately started learning about Norwegian culture as I was learning the language, and I became invested really quickly. I started becoming really interested, and to be able to discover a new culture, to have that language helps so much. So it's kind of, they feed into each other, and so I think that's a big part of like helping with your motivation, helping you understand sometimes where a linguistic, maybe more pragmatic things, but they're just always, they reinforce each other. So
Yes, they do. And also kind of like open it opens a door to you to the Nordic cultures.
right,
No, Nordic cultures like Swedish, Norwegian, Danish. So if you want to learn Swedish, you can just jump right in. It won't be that much of a difference.
totally,
We jump to Swedish or Norwegian, but then we go to Finnish. Then how about that?
little different.
A little different, but yeah. But yeah, it just opens doors, right? Like I say, it's more no language learning is equal. So it's just something that expands and expands. Like get here, you can apply this to this culture, but not. You just learn how to maneuver it. It's kind of hard to explain. Just something you need to know how to maneuver. So, how about you guys? Do you have any language learning experiences? Write down in the comments. I'm sure you like
The methods you use.
the methods you use. Let us know because I'm a resource hoarder. I hoard resources. I literally do.
So true.
So
Clean his Google Drive.
yes, using my Google Hat. So yeah, thank you so much. Until next time. Ciao, ciao.